Hello, everyone. It's so good to be back with you. And I wanted to say, first and foremost, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. And I want to thank you for joining me today as we continue our weekly discussions based on the book, The Integral Human Being. As we understand, this is a weekly discussion based on each book. And I just wanted to remind everyone the psychology series or psychology collection, as it may be known as, is a 16 book series authored by Joanna de Angelis in collaboration with Divaldo Pereira Franco. Joanna de Angelis, the spiritual author, created this bridge between spiritism and depth psychology. So, during the next several weeks, we will be discussing each chapter and maybe highlight some of the issues, root cause, and even solution therapies that Joanna offers in her book. If we consider how vulnerable we are, this is a moment that humanity as a whole is undergoing a lot of pain, a lot of suffering. And in my opinion, to me, this book is such a gift as it discusses root causes, as I mentioned before, and potential solutions or therapies to many of our own psychological issues. Our focus is really to bring up those weekly topics found in this amazing little book. And the ultimate goal is to ask ourselves, how do I ensure I have with me the balance I need, stability, and emotional maturity, despite what everything else is around me. So, as we can continue, we see in this graph here, that's where the book is broken down. So there are a total of 40 chapters, if you include introductions, and the book is divided in those 9 parts. Today, the topic we're going to be discussing is in the second part of the book, and it's the title. It's called Social Phobias, but you may not be really interested in knowing about social phobias, but the book really goes through a range of topics from, say, fear to insecurity to mental illness, all the way to ethical consciousness. So I invite you to join me to explore these themes that Joanna de Angelis brought to us through those two lenses, spiritism and depth psychology. But as we begin our discussion in earnest, I have to ask you and me, who are we? And that's the crux of the matter, right? In this chapter that we are focusing on the idea of social phobia, right? We start to see, well, how does social phobia fit into this cluster of chapters within the book? So the book, integral the integral human being, has a second part which is called strange destinations, safe paths, and we're confronted exactly with how how can we take a moment or moments to reflect, to think about our lives, and maybe look and investigate and explore the various cycles that we may already have gone through. And I ask you and me, right? Did we plan to get here? If so, what were the elements that led us to where we are now? What were perhaps the triggers, cultural norms, expectations that led us to where we are? And if we did not plan to get here, why not? Did we simply opt to what felt safe or perhaps easy? Did we conform to what was expected? No need to answer, because this is an interesting discussion as Joanna de Angelis begins right off the bat in this chapter addressing personality types. And you go like, Marcia, I'm already confused. Well, it's important in this question about who we are. We are confronted with different tendencies from a personality perspective. So, as you know, Carl Gustav Jung was a Swiss psychologist and psychotherapist who is best known for his analytical psychology work and the definition of psychological types. In the book that was named titled Psychological Types, published in 1921, and I say, yes, it was published more than 100 years ago, and it's still the source today. If anyone, for instance, is going, at least here in the US, to say an MBA program, right in the first week, usually the schools will provide you with some psychological study or profiling of you, either through Myers-Briggs, which is based on Carl Gustav Jung work, or other types, Strengths Finder, etc., etc. But in any case, so very old, if you think about, published over 100 years ago, yet solid, still plays a very current use of purpose in our day-to-day life. But he published it in in his attempt to find what he called a compromise between, at the time, two mainstream theories. And one of those theories belonged to Sigmund Freud, and the other belonged to Alfred Adler. Carl Jung was the first person to introduce the idea, the concept, the notion of introversion and extroversion, right? And his personality types or typology is very important for us to think about it. That typology, those personality types, as he identifying them, it is not a system to just say, "Oh, I think you are an extrovert. Oh, I think you are an introvert," and its combinations. It's not a label, a system to label people, but it was not either invented to simplify um, our understanding of people, because we are quite complex, right? Instead, Carl Gustav Jung invented these or created these psychological types to demonstrate the opposite, the complexity of human types and the consequences of that complexity. So his original typology is built on two personality attitudes, and I already brought it up, extroversion and introversion. And in addition to that, four functions, or some people hear or refer to it as modes of orientation. So they are thinking, sensation, intuition, and feeling. So the four functions are divided into what Jung called rational, or judging, and irrational, or perceiving, right? So you start to see the combination. So the thinking and sensations, those two are rational types of function, and intuition and feeling are, he calls it, irrational. Introversion, according to Jung, is it's best expressing the focus that one has in his or her inner world, while the opposite, extroversion, is that expression of my focus, say, in my outside world. And according to Jung, it's not possible to say you are an introvert and only an introvert, or an extrovert in isolation. It really, you need to see the gamut of how introvert, how extrovert but also how those two personality attitudes are associated with one of the four functions. So, again, thinking, sensation, intuition, and feeling, which brings us into eight variations, right? So, extrovert thinking, introvert thinking, extrovert sensation, introvert sensation, so on and so forth. So, according to Jung, we all have this rather complex psychology. And according to him, we can never really have a pure type. For example, if we are, say, identified as an extrovert thinker, not me, but extrovert thinker, for example, our less developed would be introverted or feeling. Right, so ET versus IF, using how Myers Briggs would identify that, right? And those opposite from what I am not, it will still reside with me in my unconscious. So Jung referred to this say less developed traits as repressed traits within me. And he believed that our repressed traits will rise from time to time, like anything else. And how do they do that? Well, one common way is through dreams, right? Or how we start to observe ourselves, to pay attention to ourselves in our process of individuation. Hint, hint, the book is about the integral human being, which is that process that a human being, all of us go through into become individuated one, but integrated with all that we have, all that we bring within ourselves, right? So this process of becoming aware of ourselves is the process for achieving a sense of wholeness. So it's, in my opinion, it's super important for us to start gravitate in those concepts brought here by Carl Gustav Jung. If we maybe stop to reflect upon our own cultural environment, we can see that both extroverts and introverts have a place, right? But if we reference the personality theory to better understand difference and commonality, we can see that there is maybe some cultures or some genders or some even other attribution that will push you to be or to be more identified with this type versus that type. So, what are we going to talk about, right? We're here to share what is commonplace, I believe, but it's important to share this baseline understanding of a personality type because each one has a role in our society. And our real quest, as I said before, is just to look at who we are so that we can fulfill this beautiful, ginormous promise to attain our personal potential, which is simply said, let us become who we truly are. And the chapter begins with an interesting statement that I'm going to read here, right? Where Joanna writes the following: except in cases of pathological phenomena in the personality type, when pressed by restrictions of several natures, introverted individuals cease to react and assume phobic behavior. And I say, stop, what? What are we talking about? You just mentioned that there is room for extroverts and introverts. What are you saying here? Well, let's pause for a few minutes to understand how the concepts of social phobia and phobic behaviors, and then we're going to talk about how those, for example, introverted individuals will react a different way or another in this environment that pushes us to be what we're really not naturally. So, what what are we talking about when we say social phobia? What is a phobic behavior? What are they? So basically, really, just as straight from dictionaries, right? Social anxiety disorder is called the name for social phobia, and its dictionary definition tells us that it is a long-term and overwhelming fear of social situations, and it's really common to many of us, but it usually can start to be expressed during our teenage years. It can be quite distressing, and in the end, it may have a huge impact in how we live, how well we are, mentally speaking. It is, for some, a medical condition that is a social phobia that causes what? Fear and anxiety when you are around people in a given set of circumstances. So, for some, that is materialized, that social anxiety from the fear of being judged, exposed and judged, watched by others. And it's very interesting when we talk about it because we, of course, we live in a world where we put ourselves under the microscope through joining and being actively engaged in social media, right? But this disorder, as the pathology, is treatable usually with talk therapy and or medication such as anti-anxiety or antidepressant. The question that I have here for all of us is, how did we get here? How do we become so vulnerable to the pressures put by society that leads us to this social phobia, right, or phobic behavior? And for the most part, and this is the majority of the cases, it is found that social anxiety disorder can be linked directly if those patients say are or have been uh, through abuse, bullying, or even strong teasing. So if we flip back to the theory of personality types, right? Introverted individuals are what? Usually shy, and for the most part, in our culture, shy kids are also more likely to become socially anxious adults. So, for example, let's say this is just an example. If I develop some sort of medical or health condition that exacerbates some thing in my appearance, right? The color of my skin or my eyes, whatever, in the face or in your body, and or even your voice as a mechanism for communication, right? It can trigger social anxiety as well. And according to American Psychiatric Association, it's important for us to just remind ourselves phobias are the most common psychiatric illness among women and the second most common among men. Okay. And to further go into those data points, the National Institute of Mental Health, right, NIMH, suggests that the percentage of adults impacted each year is about 10% of all adults in the US. And it's just a really quite heartfelt. There's a sense of me that feels terrible that our children and our youth are coming up to be that in a world where that social exposure is so important, right? So overwhelming. And just another data point is that those types of phobias impact women twice as much than men, and there is many explanations, right? But some evolutionary and behavior theories say that it, it, it those conditions can be minimized or eliminated with those types of therapies that I mentioned before: cognitive therapy, behavior therapy, or medication. What are the most common social phobias? Oh, outside of the social phobia specific that we're going to talk about, which is that intense fear of social interaction, right? There are things such as arachnophobia. I remember a movie about it, right? Orphidiophobia, a fear of snakes; acrophobia, fear of heights; aerophobia, fear of flying, so on and so forth. And we're going to really focus on social phobia, such as the fear of social interaction, and it's something very real. As we said, about 10% of all U.S. adults each year are impacted by those phobias. And as we can imagine, these phobias lead to this strong, evident, marked fear, right? And can result in symptoms such as dizziness, nausea, um, inability to breathe. And in some cases, it can escalate all the way to a panic attack. So, of those 10 most common social phobias, it is the social phobia specifically and agoraphobia are the two that are in the category of anxiety disorders, whereas all the other 10 most common, right, which is to 8 most common phobias, are considered specific phobia because they are specifically related to a trigger object or situation, right? Dogs, height, snakes, so on and so forth. But as we go back to Joanna de Angelis, she continues her line of thinking by telling us, right? Neurosis and psychosis become manifest then. Remember, she talked about introverts can lead to a pathological moment, and just as neurosis and psychosis become manifest then, tormenting them and creating a nightmarish environment wherever they are. And I said, okay, let's just go back to define what are neurosis and psychosis. And I laugh a little bit because a good friend of mine used to say, all of you are there. You are either uh, neurotic, psychotic, or you have a psychopath, sociopath environment. So it's very interesting because all of us at the least, right, we are a bit neurotic. But what is neurotic? And hint here, I want to say neurosis, the term neurotic, is no longer used by the World Health Organization, right? They don't use in their classification of diseases or even the American Psychiatric Association. So while Joanna brings the idea, and I'm going to be true to her, let's be very clear. This is not a term that is in use anymore. But what does it define neurosis? It's simply a mental condition that is not caused by some organic disease. So it's a condition that involves symptoms like stress that can be based from depression, anxiety, obsessive compulsive behaviors, or even hypochondria, but they are not a source for a radical loss of touch with reality. So it's not caused by an organic disease. The symptoms are those stressors such as depression, anxiety, OCD, hypochondria, etc. But we're still very much in touch with reality. Neurosis is really a term that is good to understand that was used mostly by Freudian, right, to describe those any patient with anxiety, past anxiety that has most likely been repressed, right, or if very recent that it is triggering those issues. Psychosis, on the other hand, is also called this condition a psychotic experience, psychotic episode, is defined by, say, when we perceive the reality or interpret reality in a very different way from everybody around you. The most common types of psychotic experience are hallucination, delusion, or even disorganized thinking and speech. Whew, a lot of information here. But let's proceed talking specifically now about social phobia and the environment that we live in. And I say that is rather grim, right, perspective. That we read what the Joanna de Angelis brings to us as she addresses really our need for freedom, and she restates over and over again how of a fundamental importance for all of us this need is. So I want you to hold on to that because we're going to be talking about this, I believe, in the next couple of chapters. But it's this fundamental, this is something that is within ourselves, and it permeates in all of our experience, this need for freedom, right? And the issue here is that we, you and I, all of humanity, we lose the meaning of freedom as a result, and I'm quoting her here, as a result of the virtual prisons that we create, incarcerate ourselves. So let's think about it a little bit, right? We often go up and down, oscillating between a state of dissatisfaction, right? I'm not happy, I'm dissatisfied, and even attempts at the lower part of this oscillation, attempts of self-destructing, right, destroying ourselves, and the other oscillation is when we go up and we had the feeling of euphoria, happiness, etc. But when we are at the bottom of this oscillation, when we are dealing with, I don't know, dissatisfaction, resentment, sadness, anger, desire to destroy the other, and this is really an important topic as we begin this month, right? September, dedicated to mental well being and suicide prevention. And the ups and downs can evolve from, yeah, that state of sadness, melancholy, to fear. I think it goes down, right? Fear, anxiety, to a life of just unease, and worst, this systematic sense of mistrust and suspicion. So As such, it is easy to see why are we so vulnerable? Why do we give in? Can we or are we building our resilience? In the sense of resilience, I love to the image that comes to my mind, which is that of a rubber band, right? A rubber band comes in this size, and we can stretch, 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 right? And it comes back to the old size, and we can do that many, many times. In fact, in some cases, rubber band is used to hold on a number of things, which means it is stretched to the maximum to hold those things and keep holding those things for quite a bit of time, right? But that sense of resilience to be able to be stressed, stretched to a point and then come back is the ability to go back to normal, right? And um, I don't know that we are at least consciously building the ability to be stressed and go back, right? We are getting more and more stressed, but are we building the strength to go back? And when I say to go back, those stress like the oscillation, the ups and downs, I'm also talking about perhaps success, failure, and they don't come alternating. Sometimes we have success, 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 boom, loss of it all, and it can even keep going for future failures and goes back to less of a failure. So it's not a very linear or very predictive curve of ups and downs. But when we achieve the so-called success, right? Success at work, social success. I am successful in my family environment. I am healthy. My relationships are solid, right? And we got it. It's hard to do it, but we got it. We're right there. But are those the best of the best? The best of the best when we don't say, oh, everything's going well, but oh, I don't have time, or everything goes well, oh, professionally it's not going so well, so on and so forth. But when we have everything, the best of the best, do we believe that those attributes can guarantee that they will minimize or mitigate or remove our ability to be emotionally stable and well? And because in some of our societies, it is so much easier to become well accomplished, if you think in terms historically, and I'm talking mostly about Western societies, right, where those social, either socioeconomic, I'm going to use the word caste, right? It's not a very good word, but those class system are very adaptable, that perhaps through education or opportunities you can climb into that socioeconomic ladder. So in those societies, if you think that versus, oh, say 300 years ago, before the Industrial Revolution, or even say 500 years ago, the beginning of Renaissance, or even before that, the society has become replicable, our society, and what it means, it's easy to have that sense of accomplishment. I am good. The problem here is that we reach what is those material successes and we should be good, but we find ourselves without a sense of purpose, right? And we no longer are driven to do more or to even to continue to live. So it is very important for us to pause to discuss this issue of social phobias, right? When we get to the point where this driving force, right, we don't have it there, it's too easy, I'm there, there's nothing else for me to do besides maintain that status quo, inertia, if you will, without that, those phobic states may, like, right, the rubber band, those phobic states may overcome our ability to go back to normal. And they may, I don't know if you've seen that. I in my youth, we joked where we just kept doing that with rubber band until they snap, right? So in some case, those phobic states or social anxiety may overcome and lead us to not only fear and sadness, but a pathological state of anxiety or deep depression. And for me, it's important to understand that this is not uncommon. And beyond that, and this is quite alarming, we are now trending, right? We're seeing this rise of a particular state of mind that emerged in this form of social phobia. And we're talking about those of us who not only are phobic, but they actually develop a hatred for anything related to socialization. And I want to say this is important for me because we actually, um, actually, we see that this topic will keep coming back not only in this book but in many books of Joanna de Angelis. So hatred, right? And we, as a defense mechanism, I don't want anybody, this is too much for me, and I end up withdrawing from the contact of others and end up actually isolating ourselves. And we see in a very easier to talk about, we see that perhaps manifested in, ah, don't want to go out, right? I don't feel up to it, or no, I'm okay, I'll talk to you later. And those are perhaps a manifestation of those social phobias. Later, if it keeps growing, it may become just insecurities. And this is especially seen when we are expected to perform in a social group or public setting, particular type of presence, engagement, or interaction that people expect of you, right? In some professional settings, it can be seen as the proverbial, I'm expecting that executive presence in light of this group, esteemed group of people listening to you, Mr. or Miss Professional. But in the other context, you can see perhaps, oh, you're young, right? So those are labels that we put. We're young, you're happy, and I expect you to be the life of the party, or the jokester, the prankster, the entertainer, so on and so forth. And as you can imagine, the anxiety level resulting during those scenarios may actually overpower us, and may lead to some disturbing psychological conflicts. I hope this is as easy for you to see as it is to me. The fact is that moderate anxiety is actually perfectly natural. Remember when I said to you that my good friend used to say, between all of us, we're neurotic, psychotic, or sociopaths, right? We are in one of those, experience some form of um, uh, uh, behavior that may be not so easy to accept. But back to what we're saying here, moderate anxiety, that fear, the stress is perfectly natural to all of us. It is just a simple result from the fear of not meeting certain expectation. It's the fear of maybe am I ready to meet those expectations? And what do I need to do to properly get there? Am I going to choke? And if not, am I not? If I do, sorry, if I do choke in that performance, if you will people think less of me? So on and so forth. Let's just stop here to just imagine the life of, I don't know, let's say an actor. I am a theater artist, right? An actor. And just before the curtain opens, what do I go through? Or in a different scenario, those singers and entertainers in those mega tours that they go from city to city to city, often going through multiple very rapidly changed time zones, and you don't sleep and you have to practice. And I can just see the difficulty in being in your optimum stage. What about Olympian athletes just before competition, that maybe is the only time they get to be there, and in some case they spend the entire lives getting ready for that moment, right? I watched a documentary, for example, rather recently, maybe a year ago, where I believe Michael Phelps was the producer, and he discussed in that documentary the emotional and mental difficulties that Olympians, that athletes, that the top of their game go through. And it is about insecurity, but also often a state of depression that goes unnoticed by their coaches, by their family members, by their peers, right? And by the public at large. It's a very important message for all of us to start paying more attention and don't expect so much. My heart really goes to all of us. Any one of us who must face those critical moments in the spotlight, going through the social anxiety. My heart also goes to all of us that start to exhibit those types of anxieties when they're triggered by common day-to-day issues, or moments that we can say, oh, this is no need to worry, this is common, right? As in coming home and closing the door, or going outside, crossing the street and being around people. Those are the things, or getting to an elevator. And I know that is just as real as, say, that entertainer in a vest in a sea of people looking at them in the spotlight. But there are, for example, some of the symptoms, like I mentioned earlier, right? Fast heart race, sweating, trembling with fear, and those symptoms may unfortunately impact our well-being, our mental stability, and trigger that pathological anxiety that we talked about. So in so many words, social phobia may prevent us from simple tasks such as reading out loud in front of a group of people, right? Or, and I'm guilty of this, where you are working with a virtual team, and everybody can see your face on camera, but also you share your screen while others observe, and you typing, and things are not as clear as they should be. Oh, hate it. Or even going to meet somebody very important in a social setting, and you sit at a restaurant and people look at you just to see if you even know how to maneuver simple tasks as eating and talking in public with the elegance that you're expected. It is as simple as that, and it may impact all of us in different circumstances. But it is all the sense of feeling that you're under that proverbial microscope. We are being observed and not with kind us. So as a result of this, we start to avoid people, right? Avoid being around others. I don't want to be around you. I prefer not to be with strangers or family members or even my closest friend if that's what I'm going through. I prefer to stop the suffering. And we may ask here, what is going on? And when we were feeling like this, when the notion that we are, quote unquote, air quote here, under the gun, right? Joanna de Angelis tells us in this chapter, in this book, that you may want to consider exercise in concentration and effort to overcome that feeling of vulnerability. And she continues that by telling us to also exercise relaxation, right? Breathe, do deep breathing until we are able to move to a place that we can feel. Ah, I can handle that. So, regardless of how well we're able to control feelings, most of us, it's common, may lose our ability to enjoy social situations. Our natural tendency is to flee, to hide away. The problem with this, and I want to just change the slide here because what do I want to speak in terms of the counter to all of this is that we are social beings, yes, and we're beyond that. We're also the only known ethical animals. So for us to get to this very important level of evolutionary state as this ethical animal, we had to acquire the state of ethical consciousness. We, to do this, to be able to grow, to be better each day, unfortunately, I have to say it's unfortunate, but we must be pushed from our comfort zone and be exposed to a number of different people, different situations, different activities, different events. So, with that, it is important for us to know that we are, as a result, invited to live meaningfully. We are also invited to be challenged at every step of the way. That is how we actually learn to say, delineate, discriminate, define what is good for me, for you, or what is not so good, what causes perhaps pain or hurt me or the others. So between the notion of, say, this is beautiful, this moves me, or this is not acceptable, or between this is a logical, rational step, or no, this is absurd, irrational, unacceptable. We need to be able to grow, to be able to make those distinctions. So we are, as a result, invited to learn, to be there, to see that, and to differentiate those values as we go through those experiences. And as we are going through those experiences, we are able to examine if we are or not living according to those ethical and moral standards that we're defining as a person, as an individual, as a society. These standards are essential, right? They are considered to be the important critical standards to achieve the goals we pursue and lead us to achieve a state of contentment and happiness, true contentment, not fake. But beyond meeting our ethical values, right, we as biosocial beings must understand how relationships with other people in our lives is really key to our progress. It's essential to our progress. So, as much as I prefer to not be exposed to hurt and lead a life, right, living in isolation, when I do that, I may end up reverting to a state of living that is comfortable, easy, protected, but it's not pushing us to grow. And as a biosocial animal, just very interesting. I was just listening to a very known presenter, Haroldo Dutra Diaz, and he was talking exactly about that. Some of the research about those children that have been found, like Mowgli in the book, right, by Kipling, or that Disney created a very cool motion animated motion picture on Mowgli. But what is that a child in isolation? How would a child create the ability to have access language and even to be able to emote facially with words or even physical expression? And as we think about it, we can see, right? We have a lot of demands as a social animal to engage all of us in social relationships, and we may end up in relationships. It's, I would say, almost inevitable, that do not really have an emotional content, right? So we are social beings, biosocial beings. We need social interactions to grow. Those social interactions may hurt us in so many words, may lead us to a sense of being exposed, and we may end up with relationships that are just hollow. They're flimsy. They're just for appearances, right? And it is important because they are not the ones that will push us to grow. And from that perspective, the empty culture of social media, I'm not saying that every social media platform is bad, but generally speaking, right, the empty culture of friends, right? Even the words friends who are not really friends, and even the constant feeling of being the spotlight may answer our growing trend of social isolation as a phobic behavior. So, from that perspective, I know this is exhausting, and I know that we want to protect ourselves. But from a spiritist perspective, Joanna de Angelis reminds us that we are not alone. We are not alone. And we must remember that this dehumanizing process that we go through in creating a picture perfect, idealized view of our life, but it's not. It's not leading us to be better. We must pay attention to those relationships. We must pay attention to our feelings. And most important, we must be kind to ourselves and to all of those around us. So, with that, I want to say thank you. And I'd love to see you next time when we talk about hatred, not only hatred, but hatred and suicide. So, with that, we close our second part of the book, and I really am excited as we continue to in a couple of weeks to finish this second part and start the third part of this book. Thank you so very much for listening to this live. Goodbye.